y'all, I'm Jennifer Purcell with Spark Flash Fiction, and we are here tonight with Payton Tilley, who wrote Ruby of Crimson in our latest issue. And just in case you haven't heard, it was the Reader's Choice story that y'all voted on. Payton Tilley believes every word is important and that fiction brings us reality. She adores the Middle Ages and could willingly travel back in time at any moment. Alas, North Carolina is her home and where her family is. If not riding, Peyton can be found riding horses, reading, dreaming of ballroom dancing, or painting. Ruby of Crimson is her first published work. So let's start, Peyton, by talking about your story. What was the inspiration behind Ruby of Crimson?
Okay, so when I heard about the fantasy issue, I knew I wanted to add some sort of historical element to it because I love history. And so I had been watching, the 2005 Pride and Prejudice and the old Sense and Sensibility. And I was like, oh, the Regency period would be so awesome to add a little twist of fantasy. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. And then the characters just kind of morphed out of that as I was writing. So, yeah.
Cool. So, do you love to read historical romance then, since you love history?
Yes, it's probably my favorite. Yeah, anything with a little bit of history. It doesn't even matter what time period it is.
So, what's a historical romance that you read lately that you really loved?
So the last one that I completely fell in love with was Enchanting the Heiress by Christie Ann Hunter, which also happens to be a Regency one. Man, that book knocked my socks off. It was so good. I loved it.
I have to agree. And just in case y'all didn't know, Christie Ann Hunter was once upon a time one of our featured authors for a Regency issue, which was so much fun. But anyways, do you have another favorite subgenre of romance, like romantic suspense or rom-com or anything like that?
I do. I really love romantic suspense. I could never, ever write it, but I love reading it. It's so suspenseful. So it's really good. I like that stuff.
Those are very dangerous to start at night when you tell yourself, I want to read one chapter before bedtime. And the next thing you know, you're in the middle and it's 2:00 in the morning. And then you can't sleep because you're thinking about all the people who could climb into your window and kill you.
Exactly. But yeah. I love all of Jane Jo Wright's books. Goodness. Hers are probably my favorite for romantic suspense.
Yes. Yeah, hers are a little creepy sometimes.
They are. They're good.
So speaking of romance, though, what is your favorite romance trope?
I have a couple. So my top one would probably be enemies to lovers. There's just something about that trope that's amazing. And I also really like love triangles, but they have to be done well, and friends to lovers. That's great. I like the slow burn of them realizing that there's something more. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically anything with banter or a little bit of drama, I like that stuff.
I have to say that's one element that I liked about your story for our issue is the fact that they were friends first. And I thought it was just really sweet when he tried to go along with her because he trusted her and she was his friend. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but he says something to her later in the story that had me just kind of like, aww. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it took forever for me to work that last scene. I was actually in front of my computer over here going, okay, I need him to say something, not to give spoilers like you said. And so I was working through it and I was like, that doesn't work and that doesn't work. So it took forever for me to get that how I wanted it to.
Well, it worked out really great. And you mentioned in your bio that this is your first published work. So tell us a little bit about your writing, tell us a little bit about your process, and what finally prompted you to submit to Spark.
Okay, so the writing process for me is a little bit different for every single thing that I do. I've found that I'm definitely a pantser, not a plotter. I can't do that, so I do know that. But everything that I write is actually, it's been different how I do it. Normally it's the idea first, and then I kind of work characters into it. But sometimes it's vice versa, it just depends. And so once I have the idea, I'll start playing around with, okay, so what's going to happen? And normally I'll have a couple scenes in my head. And let's see, how do I get from point A to B to C? And so that's kind of how that process works. But I definitely, once I'm done writing, I completely start new, blank with everything, and rewrite the whole thing, because I find that I cut out a lot of stuff that I don't need, or add stuff that works or I do need. And so definitely a rewriter, even if it's just pen and paper. Now, what was the other question? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I threw like 3 questions at you at one time.
No,
So let's back up a little bit. How long have you been writing, and what prompted you to submit to us?
Okay, so that's a loaded question itself. I've been writing for a very, very long time, even if it was just journaling or little poems that I would do. I used to have this little book of songs that I would write, which I don't want to do that now, but I used to dabble in a lot of different stuff. But seriously writing, pursuing it as something that I'd want to do, probably started 3.5 years ago. It's a little bit fuzzy now, but I started this one manuscript, just playing with it, because I had this idea in my head of a couple characters, and I didn't finish it. But from that, I was like, you know what? I really like writing. And so I started to pursue other factors, and I graduated last year, and I was, worried about, what I need to do for college, because I have a couple things I feel like I'm called to do. But writing's always been one of those things. I just feel super connected to everybody and God when I'm writing. So I kept praying about it. And then I get this email one time from just a newsletter of an author, nothing super like, wow. But the whole theme of it was, what if God's calling you to write? And so that really made me push myself along the writing journey more, because it's kind of like a wake-up call. And from that, I wrote more and more, trying to get myself on a schedule, still struggling with that, but working on it. And I went to my first conference earlier this year, and that really, really helped. It was amazing. There were so many like-minded people, and it was literally like a week of a college course, extreme, loaded, everything with just writing. And everyone was so helpful. And that also led me to discovering you guys, because I didn't know at the time that you guys were giving a class there about flash fiction and all that. I wish I would have attended it now, but I was at lunch with a couple ladies, and they were talking to me about writing and what they wrote. And they're like, yeah, we've submitted to Spark before. Have you? And I was like, Spark, what's that? And so they were telling me all about it. And when I got home from the conference, I looked it up and read some amazing stories. I kind of got addicted and could not stop reading them. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to give flash fiction a chance. And I was outside one day, and I just started writing on pen and paper this horrible, horrible flash fiction piece. It was crazy. But from that, I looked at the theme of y'all's upcoming issue, and I just went with the ideas from there. And I was so lucky to be accepted. Here we are now. And the writing journey is definitely still going. I don't think it's ever going to end, ever. And since being accepted with you all, I've had 2 other pieces accepted other places. So it's been very encouraging.
Okay, good. Because I know a lot of us, even when we've been doing this for a while, we get like really discouraged because we get all these rejections, and people are like, your writing's not good enough. And so I'm glad that you have had all these encouraging experiences. And for anyone watching that has had some discouraging experiences, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I promise y'all.
Yes.
But let's go back to your bio for a second, because I love your bio. I learned like 4 things from you just from 2 paragraphs. So from your bio, you said that you adore the Middle Ages. So tell me, what is it about the Middle Ages?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question again. Okay, I'll tell you the 2 basic things, and then tell you the more serious stuff. Okay, so number 1, the knights. Number 2, castles. So those are the fun reasons. But the Middle Ages, I started getting into medieval fantasy at a very young age. And as I got older, it turned into medieval historical. And then, reading the history books and the documentaries. And it's just something about that era, the way they lived and felt about everything. I don't know, sometimes it feels like they lived with the super big purpose. I don't know if that makes sense. And I know I'm not explaining why I love it very well. It's just that time period is kind of like I've fallen in love with it, and you can't really explain love. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's also such a big time period. What is it? It's like from 500 to 1500s. That's like a huge chunk of history. And there's so much you can learn from that. Like we have Columbus in that time period, William the Conqueror, bubonic plague. I mean, it's loaded. There's so much you can learn and just enjoy about that era. So I guess that's why I love it so much.
So do you have any books set during that period that you've really enjoyed?
Yes. So all of Melanie Dickerson's are fantastic.
It's really good.
Yes, I love all of hers. If I had to pick a favorite, I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble for picking it because I can't really. But The Silent Songbird and The Huntress of Thornback Forest are amazing. Definitely recommend those. And then the book series by Lisa T. Berggren, the Waterfall series. Well, it's really The Rivers of Time. Waterfall is the first book. That one is fantastic, especially if you're not sure if you like the medieval era, because it's about someone being taken back into that time period. And so it's really making you look at it from a different perspective while also learning a ton. But that series is amazing. And there's so many more, but I'll just stop with those two, or I'll just keep going on and on and on and on.
Well, I have to ask you, because the only medieval I've read besides Melanie Dickerson is Jody Headland. Have you ever read in person? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Really
Definitely have read some of hers, almost all of them. But yeah, they're really good. And there's another book that I'm thinking about. I've only read the first one, and I'm pretty sure it's called Glastonbury Tor by Leanne Hardy. I've never heard it mentioned anywhere else, but it actually centers around a monk. And it is so good. Like the history in it, I highly recommend that book to anyone who loves that era.
Well, you mentioned that right now you're working on a manuscript. Is that a medieval one?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. And it is a lot of fun to write right now.
Have you hit like the heavy research part of it where you're second guessing everything that you've ever written?
Yeah, definitely. So what happened was I did a little bit of research for the first draft. Well, not a little bit, but not a whole lot, because I knew I needed to get the story out. And as I was writing it, I kept doing more research, which actually just led to more questions and more questions. And so I'm doing even more now. It's like a never ending thing. But yeah, the research is definitely a lot.
I find that's the hardest part of being a historical author is the research. And it's not necessarily finding the facts you need, it's getting yourself out of the rabbit hole that you inevitably find yourself in and telling yourself it's time to stop researching and go back to writing.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. I've gotten in so many rabbit holes, which, like I said earlier, it's just more questions and questions, and they're never going to be answered, all of them.
No, they're not. Can you tell us anything else about your story, like maybe a little bit about the premise or a character that you really enjoy writing?
Well, it's set right after the Battle of Bannockburn, which is extremely important in the War for Scottish Independence. But I'm actually taking the side of the English, the people that lost horribly in this war. And it centers around this girl, and she lives in England. She's having to cope with now the Scots invading northern England. And she happens to find herself injured while defending some people during a raid. And that leads her to being close to someone who is in power. And she just goes further and further into this web of treachery. And she's trying to get out, but also save everyone else around her, because it's important for her to protect her family and those she cares about. So that was, I don't know if that was a good description, but that's it.
That was a very good description, and I need you to finish it tomorrow so I can read it. That sounds really good.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, Payton, it was wonderful having you here tonight. And I also realized before we started, I never asked you if I was like butchering your last name. So did I? But I didn't.
No, you didn't. You did it great. Great job.
Thank you. I always feel self-conscious, and I think it's because in my lifetime I've been called Purcell and Purcell, And like, you know, it happens, but then I always feel self-conscious about other people's last names. It's kind of like when you read a name in a book and in your head you pronounce it a certain way and then you hear someone else say it and you're like, oh,
Oh yeah.
I was wrong. Kind of like Carlisle, I thought it was Carl Izzle.
Oh yeah. Nope, I get you. I'm so there. I'm so there with you on that one. But you had it right.
Okay, good. I am so glad. So, one last question before we go, though, because you're from North Carolina and I'm from Georgia. So, as a Southern girl, tell me one thing you love about the South and one thing that you would love to change about the South.
Okay. Big one. Sweet tea. Oh my goodness. We went to New York one time and I asked for sweet tea. That was a big mistake. Don't do that. Very big mistake. One thing I'd change. I want more snow. Like a whole lot more snow.
Amen to that.
Yes, like I feel like I could take 5 months, just a lot of snow. Forget the heat, everything, more snow.
I totally agree with that. So, do you live kind of close to the Asheville area, or do you live in like more in like the northern part of the state?
We're in the Piedmont area, so it's kind of in the middle a little bit. We are close to Asheville. We're in between. We're close to Winston-Salem. I don't know if that helps. Yeah, we're in that area.
Gotcha. I have to admit, I'm very limited on North Carolina. The little I learned, besides Biltmore and Winston-Salem and Charlotte, is from Pepper Basham. So, you know.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Have you ever read anything by her?
I have. I did. The Red Ribbon from the True Colors series.
Oh, that one was so good. Y'all, we're going to have your TBRs loaded by the time that we're done. I think we've talked about like 5 books already at this point.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous talking to other writers because then they're also readers. And the next thing you know, you're like, okay, I have 10 more books to add on my TBR. But it was wonderful chatting with you tonight, Payton. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Don't miss out on our Love is Magical issue if you haven't read it yet. And if you are also a writer, we have an online virtual conference coming up in October that you don't want to miss out on. And you can find more info on that on our website. So everyone have a wonderful night and God bless.